Right now, millions of people are walking away from everything they've built. High-paying careers, long-term relationships, social circles they've spent decades cultivating. To the outside world, it looks like self-destruction. But Carl Jung saw this coming over 70 years ago. He called it the inevitable crisis of the awakened soul. And he believed it wasn't collapse, but humanity's most important evolution. Today, I'll reveal the 5 psychological reasons Jung identified for why awakened people must leave society, the shadow work that makes staying impossible, and the profound purpose he saw in this mass exodus. What you're about to discover might explain that unbearable restlessness you've been feeling. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. When you awaken spiritually, you don't just see through society's illusions. Your entire nervous system begins rejecting them. It's not a choice anymore. It becomes a biological imperative. Your body literally cannot tolerate what it once accepted. And Jung believed this wasn't a bug in human psychology. It was a feature designed to push humanity toward its next evolutionary leap. But here's where it gets fascinating. Jung called it the disintegration of the persona. Most people don't realize they're wearing a mask until it starts cracking. This mask, what Jung termed the persona, is every role you've learned to play. The professional you, the social you, the family you. It's not fake exactly. It's adaptive. It helped you survive. But here's what happens during spiritual awakening. You start seeing the mask as separate from your true self. Suddenly, you're watching yourself perform in meetings, pretend to care about small talk, fake enthusiasm for things that feel hollow. It's like becoming conscious during a dream and realizing you've been sleepwalking your entire life. Jung documented case after case of successful individuals who reached this point and couldn't continue. One patient, a prominent banker, told Jung, "I sit in board meetings discussing millions and all I can think is we're all pretending this matters. We're all acting out roles in a play nobody wants to be in. But everyone's too afraid to leave the stage." This isn't depression. It's clarity. And once you see the performance, you can't unsee it. But it gets more intense. Because when your false self starts dying, society doesn't celebrate your authenticity. It punishes it. Coworkers sense you're not playing along anymore. Family members feel threatened by your refusal to maintain old dynamics. Friends drift away because your presence reminds them they're wearing masks too. Jung was brutally honest about this. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. This ownership of self, what Jung called individuation, requires leaving the spaces where your false self is demanded. You literally cannot complete your psychological evolution while performing your old role. It's not about judgment or superiority. It's about incompatibility. An awakened consciousness trying to operate through a false persona is like trying to run new software on outdated hardware. The system crashes, and this crash leads directly to the second transformation. This is where Jung's work gets revolutionary. Most people think awakening means becoming more light, more positive, more spiritual. Jung said the opposite. True awakening requires descending into your shadow, all the parts of yourself society taught you to hide, deny, repress. Here's the problem. Modern society is built on shadow projection. We externalize our darkness onto others, other political parties, other nations, other races, other classes. This projection is what maintains social cohesion. Everyone agrees who the bad guys are, and this agreement creates tribal belonging. But when you start integrating your shadow, something terrifying happens. You can't project anymore. You see your own capacity for everything you judge in others. Your own greed when you condemn billionaires. Your own authoritarianism when you fight against control. Your own unconsciousness when you judge the sleeping masses. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's what he didn't say loudly enough. When you stop projecting, you become deeply disturbing to those who still need their projections. I'll give you a real example. During spiritual awakening, many people recognize their own narcissistic shadows, the parts that crave specialness, superiority, enlightenment itself as an ego achievement. When you own this, instead of projecting it, you stop playing the game of who's more evolved. But in spiritual communities that run on hidden hierarchies of consciousness, your refusal to play makes you dangerous. You can't condemn this unconscious masses because you see your own unconsciousness. You can't rage against the system because you recognize your own participation in it. You can't even fully blame those who hurt you because you see how you've hurt others in similar ways. This isn't about excusing harmful behavior. It's about recognizing what Jung called the collective shadow. We're all participating in the darkness we claim to oppose. And once you see this, you can't participate in society's projection games anymore. Society needs its scapegoats, its villains, its others to define itself against. When you withdraw your projections, you withdraw the energy that maintains these social structures. You become psychologically unusable to the collective. And the collective sensing this begins to push you out. Most people stop here, but the third transformation changes everything. Jung discovered something that sounds mystical, but is psychologically precise. Awakened consciousness doesn't experience time the way society demands. He called this the reality of the psyche. The fact that psychological time is circular, synchronistic, meaningful in ways that defy clock time. Think about how society functions. Schedules, deadlines, 5-year plans, retirement savings. Everything is built on linear time. The assumption that life moves from point A to point B, that progress means moving forward, that success can be measured in accumulated years of achievement. But here's what happens in awakening. You start experiencing what Jung called synchronicities. Meaningful coincidences that suggest reality is more like a web than a line. Past, present, and future start bleeding into each other. You have dreams that predict events. You think of someone, and they call. You see patterns and symbols that seem to be speaking directly to you. Jung wasn't being mystical here. He was observing that consciousness, when it expands, begins operating according to what he called a causal orderedness, an organizing principle beyond cause and effect. This is why awakened people often seem out of sync with society. They literally are. They're operating on psychological time while society demands mechanical time. One of Jung's patients, a successful engineer, described it perfectly. I sit in planning meetings where we map out the next quarter, and I want to laugh, not from arrogance, but from absurdity. I'm experiencing time as this flowing, living thing where past traumas are more real than tomorrow's deadline, where a dream feels more significant than a business contract, where a moment of presence contains more value than a year of productivity. You can't explain this to someone living in linear time. How do you tell your boss that you can't commit to the 5-year plan because you're experiencing temporal dissolution? How do you explain that scheduling feels like violence to your psyche when you're learning to follow what Jung called the natural rhythm of the individuation process? This temporal incompatibility becomes unbearable. You're asked to show up at 9:00 a.m. when your soul is still processing a dream. You're expected to move on from grief when psychological time has you still in the depths of loss. You're pushed to plan your future when you're being called to stay present to what's dying. Society's time is mechanical. The self's time is organic. And once you've shifted to organic time, mechanical time feels like prison. If you're recognizing these patterns, your false self dying, unable to project shadows anymore, feeling out of sync with mechanical time, you're not going crazy. You're going sane in an insane world. The leaving isn't giving up. It's growing up into who you really are. Before we explore the final 2 reasons awakened, people must leave, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join thousands navigating this transformation together. Share in the comments which of these 3 transformations you are experiencing most intensely. Your honesty might give someone else permission to honor their own psychological evolution. Now, these next two reasons reveal why Jung believed this exodus wasn't just personal. It was collective destiny. This is where Jung's genius becomes almost prophetic. He understood that awakened individuals don't just become conscious of their own unconscious, they become painfully aware of the collective unconscious surrounding them. And this awareness, he argued, creates an almost unbearable psychological burden. Imagine suddenly being able to see everyone's shadows, not through judgment, but through direct perception. You walk into a room and feel the unprocessed grief 3 generations deep. You sit in a meeting and sense the childhood wounds driving every power play. You watch the news and see not current events, but ancient patterns repeating. What Jung called archetypal possessions playing out on a mass scale. Jung wrote, "The meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door whose painful constriction no one is spared, who goes down to the deep well. But here's what happens after you've gone through that narrow door. You realize almost everyone around you is still avoiding it. This isn't about feeling superior. It's about energetic overwhelm. When you've developed what Jung called psychological consciousness, you become a kind of lightning rod for the unconscious material around you. Other people's repressed emotions, denied shadows, and unintegrated traumas start constellating around your awareness." One of Jung's female patients described it hauntingly. "I used to think I was highly sensitive. Now I understand I'm highly conscious. I don't just feel others' emotions. I feel what they refuse to feel. I carry not just my own shadow, but the shadows of everyone who won't carry theirs. It's like being awake in a world of sleepwalkers and absorbing all the dreams they won't remember." This is why awakened people often develop chronic illness, anxiety, or exhaustion that no doctor can explain. They're not just processing their own psychological material. They're involuntarily processing the collective unconscious of their environment. Jung called this participation mystique, a psychological state where boundaries dissolve and you carry what isn't yours. Society doesn't just fail to recognize this burden, it actively exploits it. Awakened individuals become unofficial therapists for everyone around them. Energy vampires seek them out instinctively. Narcissists target them because they sense someone who sees deeply and might offer the unconditional acceptance they crave. Unconscious family systems designate them as the identified patient, the one who carries the symptoms of the entire system's dysfunction. And here's the crucial point Jung made. You cannot heal or integrate at the level of consciousness while surrounded by those committed to unconsciousness. It's like trying to get sober in a bar. The environment itself maintains the disease. This is why isolation isn't antisocial for awakened beings. It's psychologically necessary. What looks like withdrawal is actually what Jung called the transcendent function, creating space for a new level of consciousness to emerge that can bridge the opposites and birth something genuinely new. But the fifth and final reason is perhaps the most profound of all. Jung's most revolutionary idea was that within each person exists what he called the self. Not the ego, not the persona, but an organizing center of the whole psyche that knows your true purpose. And here's the terrifying truth. The self's agenda has nothing to do with society's agenda. Society wants you productive, compliant, consuming. The self wants you whole, authentic, individuated. Society values external achievement. The self values internal integration. Society measures success by accumulation. The self measures it by how much illusion you've shed. Jung observed that when people reach a certain level of awakening, they start receiving what he called demands from the self. Powerful internal directives that often contradict everything that seems logical or safe. Leave the marriage that looks perfect but feels dead. Quit the job that pays well but kills your soul. Move to a place that makes no sense but calls to your depths. These aren't whims or midlife crises. They're what Jung called the self-regulating function of the psyche, your deepest wisdom, correcting course, often dramatically. The self doesn't care about your comfort. It cares about your completion. Here's what makes this so difficult. The self's calling often requires betraying everyone else's expectations, your parents' dreams for you, your partner's need for security, your own ego's attachment to identity and status. Jung was blunt about this. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege requires what feels like betrayal to everyone who needed you to stay who you were. One of Jung's most profound case studies involved a successful doctor who kept having dreams of living in a simple cabin in the mountains writing poetry. For years, he dismissed these dreams as escapist fantasy. But they intensified, became demanding, turned into physical symptoms. Chest pains that had no medical cause, anxiety that no medication could touch. Finally, at 52, he left everything. His colleagues called it a breakdown. His family staged interventions. But Jung understood this wasn't pathology. It was the self demanding its true life. They're called to a life that society cannot understand, validate, or support. It's not about rejecting the world, but about accepting a mission that requires leaving the world's terms. Jung saw this happening on a mass scale. He predicted that as humanity approached what he called the spiritual problem of modern man, more and more individuals would be called to leave collective life and pioneer new ways of being. Not as escapism, but as evolution, not as spiritual bypassing, but as psychological necessity. The self's call is non-negotiable. You can delay it, medicate it, rationalize it away. But Jung observed that it only gets louder, more insistent, more creative in its disruption of your false life. Physical symptoms, relationship crises, professional failures, all orchestrated by the self to free you from a life that was never yours. But here's what most people miss about Jung's vision. He didn't see this exodus as the end. He saw it as the beginning. The leaving isn't about permanent isolation. It's about what he called the return of the transformed. Jung understood that awakened individuals don't leave society to escape it, but to transform at a depth that's impossible while embedded in collective unconsciousness. It's like a caterpillar entering the chrysalis. The dissolution isn't death. It's metamorphosis. But you cannot become a butterfly while other caterpillars are telling you to stay in formation. He observed a pattern. Those who honored the leaving, who completed their individuation in solitude or small conscious communities, eventually developed what he called the transcendent function, an ability to bridge the conscious and unconscious, the individual and collective, the spiritual and material. These individuals don't return to society as it was. They return as what Jung called carriers of consciousness, people whose very presence catalyzes awakening in others, not through preaching or teaching, but through embodiment. They've integrated their shadows so deeply that they don't trigger others' projections. They've transcended linear time so completely that they bring presence to every interaction. They've answered the self's call so fully that they inspire others to hear their own. Jung saw this as humanity's evolutionary strategy. Not everyone awakens at once. Jung's ultimate paradox. What looks like collapse from the outside is often breakthrough in slow motion. Jung understood this better than anyone. He warned us. Collective transformation doesn't come all at once in a tidal wave. That would be chaos. Instead, individuals are called out, broken open, transformed, and then returned. Not as the same people, but as carriers of new consciousness. Each person who answers this call makes it easier for the next wave to follow. That is how humanity evolves. And here lies the paradox Jung identified. You can only truly serve society by leaving it. You can only heal the collective by first separating from it. You can only bring light by descending into your own darkness, alone. This isn't spiritual bypassing or elitist escapism. It's not about superiority. It's psychological law. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot lead where you have never gone. You cannot awaken others while you're still asleep yourself. The leaving, then, is not an abandonment of duty. It is preparation for a very different kind of return. Not a return to conformity or to fitting back into the old system, but a return as something new, someone capable of helping birth what is trying to emerge. Jung saw the signs of this necessity everywhere in his own time. He witnessed the mental health crisis long before it had a name. He observed the meaning crisis that plagued modern man, the emptiness of spirit hidden beneath material abundance. He predicted it would all intensify until enough individuals had the courage to step away, transform, and come back bearing new consciousness. We are living in that intensification now. What looks like mass breakdown, collapsing institutions, fraying communities, rising anxiety, is not simply destruction. It is social evolution happening in real time. Each individual who leaves to answer the self's call weakens the grip of the old structures and strengthens the foundations of what is being born. It looks like decay only because we mostly see what is dying, not what is gestating. So here's what Jung would want you to hear. If you are feeling the unbearable pressure to leave, to walk away from your career, your relationship, your lifestyle, perhaps even your entire sense of identity, you are not failing. You are being called. The discomfort is not weakness. It is growth trying to happen. The isolation you feel is not punishment. It is preparation. Your false self must die for your true self to emerge. Your shadows must be integrated if your light is to be genuine. Your life tethered to collective timing must end so that your unique timing can begin. The collective unconscious must be left so that your individual consciousness can flourish. And ultimately, society's agenda must be abandoned so that your self's purpose can be revealed. Remember, the transformations Jung mapped are not linear stages. They weave together in one movement: the death of the false self, the integration of shadow, the shift of time, the release of collective burdens, and the call of the self. This movement is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. It is not easy. Jung never promised it would be. He only promised it would be real. And in a world of illusions, reality is the ultimate revolution. If you're being called to leave, if you're already in the wilderness of leaving, or if you've left and are stumbling your way through the unknown, you are not alone. You are part of what Jung saw as humanity's most important transformation. So trust the leaving. Trust the process. Trust yourself. Because the world doesn't need you to stay small, safe, and asleep. The world needs what you will become on the other side of this transformation. And perhaps Jung's most famous words remind us why. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Sometimes awakening means leaving everything outside in order to discover everything inside. The world is waiting for what only you can bring.